Hello, my name is Erin Coggins, and I am honored to be presenting at this year's first virtual conference. I teach a history class on World War II and work closely with World War II veterans, so this is a subject very dear to my heart. Today I'm going to talk to you about war brides. I have titled this presentation, First Came Love, Then Came Marriage, Then Came Life in a Strange New Land, and a Farewell to Everything Familiar. It's a subject that hasn't received much attention. If you'll do a quick Google search, you'll see a lot on Canadian war brides, but not much on American war brides. So this is a source that's really untapped. Between 1942 and 1952, 1 million American soldiers married foreign women from 50 different countries. And if you look at the presentation here, it's kind of a breakdown. It's a rough breakdown. It's an estimate. 100,000 were British. 150 to 200,000 were from continental Europe. About 16,000 hailed from Australia and New Zealand. 50 to 100,000 from the Far East, including Japan. And by 1950, 14,175 were German women. It really wasn't supposed to happen, this marriage between American GIs and foreign ladies. The 2 million U.S. servicemen arriving in Britain to prepare for the D-Day invasion were actually given a 38-page handbook instructing them to avoid upsetting the British during the so-called friendly invasion. The British had already felt by the Americans that they were overpaid. The GIs made more money than the British soldiers. They said they were oversexed because they the British ladies were very attracted to these fresh-cut and friendly American GIs, and they were over here. So there was a little bit of animosity already. And so marriage was discouraged. In fact, a July 1942 article in Yank magazine ran under the headline, "Don't promise her anything. Marriage outside of the U.S. is out." Now, historians say this was an exaggeration, but not really. They really did not want this fraternization. The War Department required overseas troops to obtain official permission in order to wed. If they wed without this official permission, it could lead to a court-martial. So you can see this was not something that the American government really wanted. If you fell in love and you wanted to marry, it was a very complex process to receive permission. It required around 15 forms, and it could take up to a year to gain permission or even receive a rejection. Meanwhile, what they would do is they would have the British Red Cross that would go in and talk to we'll just focus on Britain at the moment, that would talk to the potential bride's family. They compiled a report on these young ladies, their behavior, their parents, their allegiance, how much money they had, things of that nature, their health. And they would use this to hand over in order to gain permission. The same took place in America. The groom's family was actually interviewed. Their bank accounts were looked at. I mean, if you were going to bring a bride back to the States, did you have enough money to support her, to support a family? And once these investigations were over, a commanding officer had to give approval. And there's stories of one gentleman whose commanding officer tried to convince him to wait, there'll be a good American lady for you back home, so don't be hasty in marrying. There's a story about a gentleman in Montana whose father actually rejected the marriage, and it wasn't based on she being from England or she being a foreign war bride. It was based on, he said, it was their business, and there was no reason for the government to intervene in a personal relationship such as marriage. And so based on principle, he denied his son from bringing home a war bride. So there are thousands of stories about this process and this approval process. In fact, and you'll watch some of the old movies and you'll see, especially the War Bride movies, it involves usually that commanding officer. But it happens rather quickly in the movies, and we know in real life it could take up to a year. These ladies, especially the British war brides, were called wallflower wives. Many were perceived as nothing but a gold digger. They were capitalizing on opportunity to take Americans' money. And this was prejudice in their own country for this. At times, these ladies had to wait and wait and wait for this process, and many of them wanting to get married. There's an incident in early 1945 where about 500 brides visited the U.S. Embassy in Britain daily, demanding, when can I join my husband in the United States? We need answers. Some of them even had children to transport. In November of 1945, brides even took to Eleanor Roosevelt's hotel room there in London, chanting, "We demand ships and we want our dads." So thereafter the marriage was approved and they got that approval, they really were searching to get home, their new home in the United States. But didn't come easy. There were even further blocks. Once you were approved to go to the United States, there was a holding center, and it was called Tidworth Processing Camp there in England. Many billed it as a country club for war brides. However, it was not anything close to a country club for war brides. They slept in large, poorly heated dormitories that were once used by American soldiers. They were fed by disgruntled German and Italian prisoners of war. So it wasn't a happy reception at all. Lots of them, or most of the British ladies, reported the exams they had to undergo to check for health. A lot of those exams were humiliating to them. They were personal in a female nature, and many of them raised in a very stoic and kind of sheltered 1940s British upbringing just were astonished at how they were being treated. And because of this, many of them bailed. They were like, we're not going to go to America. We're married or not. We're not going to be susceptible to such treatment. So many left, refusing to wait. You know, we're just tired of waiting to be with our husbands. And then came 1945, War Brides Act, and this kind of was the answer these war brides were waiting for. Congress enacted exceptions to the national origin quotas on the Immigration Act of 1924. And they did this in order to help these World War II soldiers' foreign spouses and fiancés that they met in service to get to America. It was a 3-year bill where they had to 3 years to move those families to the United States. It was expanded a few months later to include the fiancés, and that fiancé bill was a 3-month temporary visa for these foreign fiancés, and they would come to America. They had 3 months to marry or else had to return home. Operation War Bride did not begin until after the passage of this bill in 1945, and the first War Bride, Operation War Bride, sailed from Southampton to New York with 452 brides on it, heading to their new home in America. The War Brides Act of 1956 addressed the Chinese wives on a non-quota basis. We still did not get Japanese wives just yet. That will come a little later in 1947. But as you can see, the War Brides Act altered immigration in the United States, which I feel was a pretty big impact of World War II. The Queen Mary, which used to transport soldiers back and forth to England. I know my husband's grandfather sailed on the Queen Mary when he was heading for the D-Day invasion and training in Britain. And so these ladies were transported. In fact, the Queen Mary took about 12,886 war brides to the U.S. from Great Britain. The journey was not always a pleasant one. As you know, the sea could be rough. I know my grandfather-in-law always talked about that's the worst feeling he ever had was sailing on that Queen Mary and being sick. So it was a journey. They were packed in there, and they were often with people who kind of already had a bias against them. I mean, these were foreign women coming to their country, and they weren't quite 100%, accepted. But the Queen Mary tried its best to make these ladies feel at home. They created a newsletter for them called The Story, was called The Wives Away. And this newsletter was actually provided to the war brides, but they also were able to contribute to it as well. So it was kind of a way of saying, we're going to try to give you some tips on how to live in America. So it was recipes, there were jokes, there were stories, there were ways to act in America written on there, written in the newsletter, and all kinds of things like this, really preparing them for what it was going to be like when they stepped off the Queen Mary and onto the shores of the United States. It also kept the ladies up to date in some ways on stuff that they may have missed, current events and those kinds of things. So when you look at the Wives Away, it was a reach out to say, hey, we're welcoming you and we want you to contribute to society and our way of life. When the war brides arrived in the United States, I say there are three things that they really had to worry about. One of them was expectations. What was it going to be like when they got here? Was everything they heard about the United States true? How would they assimilate and conform, or would they have to? And then that family back home. Expectations. A lot of these ladies were quite surprised when they got to the United States. Perhaps the grand homes they were promised by their GI husbands turned out to be nothing but a farmhouse, a rickety farmhouse. So a lot of them had been lied to about what to expect. Some of them entered abusive relationships here in the United States. They were afraid to return home for fear they might lose children. Some of them, came into a family that had a discriminatory look at them for being from a different country. And so the expectations sometimes fell short. And then for a lot of war brides, probably the majority, the expectations were exactly what they thought. America was a place for peace. It was a far away from a war zone. It seemed to be more plentiful. And so those things really turned out to be what they expected. As far as conformity, this is where these ladies really had some issues. Do you assimilate and become all-American? Do you hold on to your traditions from home? Do you blend the two? And this really depended on what country they were from. The British tended to be able to keep those traditions they had and live that American life with those traditions and not be looked down upon as others from other countries. The family back home, if you'll read any war bride story, leaving family was the most difficult. I think we would all assume that. Many of them thought, I will never see my family again. A lot of their families wanted their daughters to go. Again, they were leaving a war-torn area, and they wanted them to have that peace and security they felt that the United States provided them. But overseas, also developed a relationship with these war brides. They created the Transatlantic Brides and Parents Association, and it was a way to communicate with their children, also a way to work on how they could visit the United States and visit their children and their grandchildren. And the United States had similar organizations here that worked with that particular one overseas, as well as started the War Brides Association that allowed these women to connect in their specific areas and to discuss what it was like, be able to talk to someone that knew what it was like. And in fact, these war brides got together. There's a New York Times article I will share with you during our Q&A that had these ladies together for the last time as they're getting older to kind of see the Queen Mary as it came back to the United States a few years ago. So a lot of them kept in touch and still keep in touch through various organizations. Now, we've talked about the British and how easy kind of it was to assimilate, but imagine being a war bride from the two enemy countries. So here in this slide on the left, there is a German war bride. She became the first German war bride to enter the United States. And on the right is a Japanese war bride. And these ladies had it a little differently. They weren't accepted as much. In fact, a lot of them really felt that when they got to the United States, they really needed to change their heritage. A lot of them felt really guilt-ridden on what their countries had done. And if fraternization was not accepted with the British, it definitely was stipulated to the Americans in post-war Germany that this was not the way to go, marrying the enemy. But of course, a lot of these ladies took positions with the United States Army as translators and office workers, and eventually, of course, love happened. The Japanese particularly felt a lot different than the Germans, as you can imagine. As soon as the Japanese ladies applied for their war bride status, they were given different names. Lots of times the commanding officer would just pick a name for them, an American name. This particular lady on the right, name was Kimiko, and they quickly changed her name to Peggy. So they just kind of picked names of girlfriends or loved ones and gave these ladies these names so they would feel, trying to make them fit in and assimilate a little more. These ladies commented on their clothing, how they had to change that. Many of the Japanese ladies came from very well-to-do families and found themselves after the war with nothing. So any hope of some kind of security really intrigued them with the American GIs and their families as well. This particular lady here on the right, Kimiko, she really was denied entry for a while until a young congressman in East Boston by the name of John F. Kennedy got hold of her case, and he actually sponsored a bill called the H.R. 8588. And this bill was called All for the Relief of Kimiko Yamaguchi, May 1950. And this bill allowed for Kimiko or Peggy to be able to follow her husband to the United States. So a little bit of history of President Kennedy there and helping this couple settle in East Boston. And there was not without drama as well with the war brides. There's a particular story, Knopf versus Shaughnessy, of a war bride who was born in Germany. She had kind of a interesting background where her family supported the Nazi Party, and eventually post-war she secured some civilian employment with the War Department. The War Department loved her work, felt she was excellent, and so they actually got permission from the commanding officer or commanding general to marry a U.S. citizen who was employed as a civilian in the U.S. Army. And eventually she sought for naturalization as a U.S. citizen. She was temporarily excluded from the U.S. by the Attorney General. She fought it, and it does go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does uphold, saying, you know, her background could be a threat to the United States, could not be in our best interest to allow her. So she was one war bride that was denied entry into the United States. So there was a little drama sometimes with these war brides in the courts. The impact of war brides is, to me, the culture that they brought to the United States. It also was the beginning of hyphenating ethnic identities. You're now not just an American. If you married, you were a Japanese American. You could be a German American, an Anglo-American. So many of them began to hyphenate these names and brought this culture to the United States that we may not have seen before in a different kind of way. They didn't quite say, I'm German. I am German and I'm an American now. I'm a citizen. And I'm going to assimilate, and I'm going to do that by also bringing my ideas and my culture into the marriage and into the United States, and raise their children that way. So it broadened a lot of views of foreign countries and immigration as well. And so it is something to be studied. Also, Hollywood could not fail to capture on the war bride, making several movies about war brides during the 40s. One of them starred Cary Grant, called I Was a Male War Bride. If you have not seen that one, I do recommend. There was a Japanese war bride successful movie, and then John Loves Mary, Ronald Reagan actually starred in, which was a story about a war bride from England. So it was a hot topic, something that we talked about in the post-war period. Weaving war brides into the curriculum. Most of you guys probably teach American history or world history, and you get to spend just a little moment in time on World War II, whereas I'm very fortunate and I get to spend 18 weeks teaching it. But why would you even want to bring war brides into your curriculum when you have this small time? As I mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation, it's really an untapped source for students in the United States. As I was gathering research for this and got into Google and started looking for some stories and primary sources, there weren't many on the American side. Not primary sources. There was a lot of Canadian resources, a lot of Canadian lesson plans written on war brides and videos, and you had to dig a little deep. As I got into the Library of Congress and started doing a little look, I did find a whole nother avenue of war brides, and that was the issue of interracial marriage. And so there were some pictures of that particular couple in that discussion, but nothing that was really out there. So I think it's a subject that needs to be explored. These ladies' stories need to be told. As a history teacher, you already know this. I'm not telling you anything new or anything different, but primary sources are the best way to get students engaged in the study of war brides. And I think the story of love, the story of assimilation, the story of what would you do in certain situations is a great way to learn about the impact of the United States. And the goal is, what can these ladies teach us about post-war America? And all the things we went through. Immigration, what was it like? If your student's sitting in class, would they want to go through all that for simply love? And the treatment these ladies received. How about for Japanese war brides? Do you just give up your entire identity, to come to the United States? And it's a good way, I think, to look at how the United States became such this supreme power after World War II, and everybody wanted to live here. At some point, not today, I'm not going to present to you the lesson plan, but you will receive some lesson plans from me for being a part of this conference. And it's going to be called Walking in Their Shoes. And I will present to you several primary sources to use and ways to use those. A little pedagogy session on how to get war brides into the curriculum and tell their stories. I will leave you with this thought. I work with a group called Honored Legacies for Veterans, and we're a local group here that work with World War II and Vietnam veterans and Korean veterans. And the number one thing we've learned from talking to these people is they want their stories to matter and they want their stories to live on. And the biggest honor they said anyone could give them was to make sure that children in school learn about them. And so I feel the same way about these war brides and what they contributed to our country. And their stories need to be told. There are some really interesting ones. And I'll leave you with this story. A lady fell in love. Her name was Eleanor, and she fell in love with one of our pilots in the Army Air Corps, and they had been together for about a week when he was shot down and taken prisoner of war. He made sure that he was able to write to her through the Red Cross, and they stayed in constant contact through his term there in prison in POW camp. In fact, the camp he was in is what Hogan's Heroes television series is based on. And they were able to marry as soon as he was released as a prisoner of war. The war was over, and he was able to get her to the United States, and they were married 60-something years. So there's some great stories hidden there, some great gems that I think show that World War II, these ladies, just simply by falling in love, made a great impact on our country in the post-war period. After this Q&A here, when you're interested, there's a great book called GI Brides here that I will put in your lesson plans that we will give out that can give you more information on some wonderful love stories. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me. I love World War II, and I appreciate every one of you guys for being interested and wanting to teach your students about the greatest generation.